Los Angeles. This is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Welcome to the Special Report, where truth meets action. I'm your host, Areva Martin, and today we are tackling an issue near and dear to my heart and my family, and that is the subject of autism. For those of you who don't know, my son Marty was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. A lack of resources and answers led me to found the Special Needs Network, what is now one of the country's leading nonprofit organizations working at the intersection of social justice and disability rights. So you can imagine that as a mom, as a nonprofit leader, as an autism advocate, my outrage and disgust, and I'll say that again, disgust, with the recent remarks about autism by the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Here are some of the remarks that our Health and Human Services Secretary made just last week. Kennedy mischaracterized autism as a preventable disease. He said these are kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. He also said many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize, he says, we are doing this to our children and we need to put an end to it. Finally, he said, autism destroys families. The Health and Human Secretary's words are so harmful, deeply stigmatizing, and more importantly, they are inaccurate. In fact, I would characterize what he said as disinformation. So today I've assembled a powerful panel to help me set the record straight. This panel includes one of the leading scientists, a neuroscientist. He has been studying autism for decades. It also includes a very active parent advocate and 2 self-advocates from the autism community. Now, this is a conversation about truth, it's about dignity, and it is about empowerment. And from my perspective and so many others in the autism community, this is a conversation that is long overdue. So let's get to it. Tarik El-Abour is a professional baseball player. Yes, he is a professional baseball player diagnosed with autism. Dwayne Cox is an autism advocate, and I'll just call him spoken word artist, all-around artist, and just an amazingly successful individual with 2 degrees from Loyola University. Vana is a mother and an autism advocate who is raising 2 sons, Black sons, I should say, on the autism spectrum. And Dr. Daniel Geschwind is a professor of human genetics, neurology, and psychiatry at UCLA. And he has spent, as I said, over 2 decades studying autism and what causes it. So let me start with you, Tarik. One of the lies RFK Jr. told was that a child with autism will not play baseball. Now, you are an outfielder for the Kansas City Royals. Your story is indeed extraordinary. You were diagnosed with autism at the age of 3, but you've been recognized as the first professional baseball player to be diagnosed with autism. And you've gone on to play professionally in independent leagues. You've even signed a minor league contract with the Kansas City Royals. So when you first heard the comments made by Robert F. Kennedy, what went through your mind as someone who not only played baseball, I'm sure, as a kid and played recreationally, but who has played baseball professionally?
Well, I have never heard a doctor ever say that to me in my life. And the furthest of my knowledge, he's not a doctor. So it's just, I'm kind of used to hearing stuff like that from certain people throughout my life who aren't exactly like experienced with autism, and it just goes in one ear out the other. At this point, at 32 years old, it just goes in one ear out the other. There's no other way to deal with it otherwise.
Tarik, you've done something that most neurotypical people will never do, and that's play professional baseball, play professional sports. So what does that say about the journey and the possibilities for individuals on the spectrum?
Well, I would like to think that over time it won't take as much difficulty to get there, but the more difficult things got for me in my experience, the harder I worked. And I just stepped up to work harder every single time a roadblock was thrown in my way.
I want to add now another advocacy voice to this conversation, and let's take a look at how he is using his social media platform to challenge RFK's misinformation and, as I said earlier, disinformation.
Kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date.
Dwayne, I've known you since you were a little boy. With full disclosure here, I was actually your lawyer. I represented you and your brother Drew, also on the spectrum, helped you all get into some good schools, and you both have gone on to make me so incredibly proud. You have 2 degrees from Loyola University. Drew has a degree from Loyola. You both are professionals. You both are earning income. You're working, you're paying your taxes. But what made you want to record that very powerful Instagram post, Dwayne?
Well, I remember most of the time I don't usually get involved in the politics of everything, but I remember just finally watching what everybody was saying and watching what he was saying, and I was listening to those 4 key point, or those 5 things that he had said about never playing baseball and everything like that. And I remember, wait, I've done all of those things, and I actually have the receipts to prove it. So I thought to myself, you know what? Let's be funny. Let's do something hilarious. Let me just put this on there, and just have all these examples, and basically write a caption of, wow, I wish I had known I wouldn't be able to do this a lot earlier. Not to mention, it's also part of my my advocacy journey, and in addition to that, I'm also doing things like creating a nonprofit called View Park Wellness Collective, which is supposed to be a resource hub for adults with autism who provide a community space, in a sense. We make sure that there's a seat at the table for people on the autism spectrum and for neurodiverse individuals to have the resources that they need, and it's going to be very client-based. So that's something that I'm co-founding with my brother. So that's further proof of what we're doing.
So you're an entrepreneur. Let me add that to the list of accomplishments. Dwayne, you've done so many things that people may have thought, and I know this because like I said, I've been in your life for a long time, thought that you wouldn't be able to accomplish. So at this stage, having done so much, how are you defining success for yourself?
Well, I'm defining success for myself in a way where it's that we're all on this journey called life, and I'm defining that success by just helping as much as I can and spreading good vibes and just being there for people as much as I can in any capacity, but also defining success of, am I happy at the end of the day? Am I doing what I love? Am I in a situation around people that I love? And if I'm in there, regardless of what's happening around me, as long as I'm doing something that I know is going to have a good result for me mentally down the line, I'm very much okay. I did want to add one little thing about the things about what he had said, about the things that RFK Jr. had said. I found a lot more interest in what he didn't say. And what he didn't say was that what he kind of said but didn't say outright was that these particular things were the only ways that somebody could be considered a success, paying your own taxes, holding a job, playing baseball, as if there's not a whole conglomerate of other sports that individuals on the spectrum can be very good at. And I just found that there was a bit of a kind of a, I think the best way I can put it was that he was pointing out all the things that would mess up the economy, which is just a whole other conversation in and of itself. But I wanted to have a little bit more of an analytical eye when I was really deconstructing what was being said.
I'm glad you said that, Dwayne, about the things that he didn't say. Tarik, what are some of the things about living with autism that you wish more people, including our Health and Human Services Secretary, knew? Because his ignorance was on full display. It's clear that he doesn't have a clue about what most people who live with autism and then family members like myself know about autism. What are some of the things you wish he knew as well as other people?
Well, I just wish like people who don't really have experience with autism or people with autism is that we get to the same place as everyone without autism does. It just takes a different path and a different way of learning. And I was lucky enough growing up to have had enough people who were very accommodating of that. And that was a huge part of how navigating through life was as easy as someone who didn't have it, because as long as people understood, and I had a bunch of very understanding people led by my mom, because my mom is the one person who, I mean, she always made me feel normal. And when she did, everyone else did too. So I was really lucky to have a very good support group growing up.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about autism moms, but they are such rock stars. So shout out to your mom, Tarik, because she sounds like so many of the amazing moms I get to work with each and every day in my nonprofit. And Dwayne's mom is also one of those rock stars, Naomi Cox, and Dwayne has an incredible dad as well, Dr. Dwayne Cox Sr. So the parents play such a critical role. So I'm so glad to hear you lift up your mom's name and celebrate what an important part she has played in your life. And speaking of one of those rock star moms, we have one joining us today. Her name is Vana, and Vana, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. Vana, lifelong autism advocate, incredible autism mom. I've known Vana for a long time as well. She has two incredible sons on the spectrum. Both have been a part of Special Needs Network. So Vana, what was your first reaction when you heard these statements by RFK?
I had to quote Jesus the Christ on the cross and state, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do." That was it. And then the second was, I got a full-blown autistic son. Is that what we calling them these days? You know when people don't know. And having a non-speaking son who's communicating now with one finger on a keyboard and doing the deep dive of research since Soma created Halo and taught non-speakers to spell and express themselves, and being a recipient of Point to Freedom scholarships so my son can learn and have lessons weekly. Just seeing that these non-speakers are going to college, gaining degrees, doing phenomenal things. We have so many non-speaking authors. And then at Cal Lutheran, we have Edlin Pina, who holds workshops every year with roundtables with authors who allow multiple non-speakers to participate in group discussions. I just want to grab that man and hug him and choke him and take him with me on my journey so he can meet these full-blown people and go, oh, I guess I need to hang out with you more, Vana.
And Vana, I thought about you for this show because you have two sons that fall, I guess, in part of his alleged, his attempted, I should say, definition, because you do have your younger son who by, typical standards would be considered lower functioning than your older son who's on the spectrum, who is by, the words that people use would be considered very high functioning. So when I thought about the comment, tearing families apart, and I know how dedicated you are to both of your sons and all the work that you've done, and I know all the moms that you've met that we have in common whose families have been brought together, not torn apart because of their children's autism diagnosis. Speak to that comment, because I think that's the one that really drove the knife through my heart, that comment about tearing families apart.
Yes, well, statistically, if you talk about tearing a family apart, what are you saying? Divorce? Neurotypical families divorce equally as much as those dealing with autism. Okay, so that takes care of that part. And it does bring us together because any family who has something that is a challenge, they take it on and it brings everyone together. We seek out more information. Family members come to help out more. Everybody's more aware. And as a parent, you become even more close to your children. I don't really know what neurotypical families experience. I've only had one kind of world, but I get so close to these guys. I take more time to understand what it is they need because it's not prevalent. It's not right there in my face. My youngest son doesn't even know how to tell me, so I have to use telepathy, which is a real thing, I just want to say. And my older son, being verbal and having the appearance of neurotypical and then helping him navigate. And I just want to take a side note and thank you, Areva, for clowning him into having his first job. He had no idea he wanted to make money, and you offered him a job. And he said, "No, I'm okay." And you said, "You don't want to make money?" And he stopped in his tracks. He turned around. You said, "Don't you like money?" And he got a job working for Camp JPAC. And ever since then, he's gotten another job, and now he's working in Beverly Hills at Stake 48. And he's self-advocating, letting people know exactly who he is, a thriving young man, beautiful, handsome. And us as a family getting behind him and finding him the resources, finding him Special Needs Network, finding him Hollyrod, and finding him a voice to say, hey, these days he says, I'm not autistic because he feels just like everyone else.
Well, he's drop dead gorgeous for sure. Could be a model on the cover of any magazine, is so capable. So I am so glad to hear this praise report, I'll call it, about how well he is doing. Dating, let's talk about that briefly, because that's one of the we'll never, and I know, Dwayne, in your video that you posted to Instagram, you showed a picture of you and a young lady. And again, you were telling RFK, dude, you're wrong. People with autism do date. We know there's this whole series on Netflix, Love on the Spectrum, and there have been other shows about people on the spectrum dating. So talk a little, Vana, you can talk about it as from a mom's perspective of an older son that may be dating, but Dwayne, tell us about your dating life. Obviously, you've been dating because you showed us some receipts.
So I feel like we have to come up with a clear definition of dating life, because dating in LA is, even for neurotypical people, a serious hassle. So it is an ongoing journey. That's the best way I can put it. It's an ongoing journey. I have definitely tried my hand at it, but I than most other neurotypical people will, because I feel like, in fact, I'm going to use this to segue into this show that I'm writing. I'm literally writing this entire one-man show dedicated solely to to kind of give off a singular point. And that singular point is that because of how things like social media has limited a lot of people's face-to-face interactions, neurotypical people and neurodiverse people are actually more in the same boat in terms of social skills than either side would like to admit.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, I think you're right, Dwayne, because I have a lot of single friends, and Vana, I'm sure you would agree that dating, even for neurotypical people, is difficult, which is why these comments and, making people with autism, trying to other them is exactly what he was doing in these comments. But Vana, have you had any experience with your older son or even your younger son dating?
Well, they both love women. And the older one bought his own car. So he's has a dating plan in increments. As Dwayne said, dating in Los Angeles is a whole other thing. And, so you have to have what you have to attract the type of people you want to attract. That's the way he thinks. And he likes the pretty girls. So he's got a job. He just got a car. So I think he's looking to move out of my home. That's number 3. And then I think it's going to be very active. On the other hand, he is very independent and doesn't like sharing with his mom, which I understand.
Which is very typical of a young man, not sharing his, again, very typical behavior. Get a car.
Yes.
You got to have a car in LA to get a girl, right?
Yes. And so, but he's very confident, and he and his guys his friends, his other friends on the spectrum that he went to school with, who all work and all pay taxes. They have great deal of activities, and I hear them talking. So I believe there's some activity going on that I'm not much aware of. But to Dwayne's point in terms of everybody being the same these days, I agree, because I'm single and I'm dating in LA and I'm a baby boomer. We learned how to communicate. And out there in the dating world, they don't know how to communicate. So Dwayne, write that story. Get us on track, please, baby.
Tarik, do you want to weigh in? Any dating on your journey? Have you dated, want to date, had issues with dating?
I've had my good days and I've had my bad days.
But you would again say to RFK that dating on the spectrum is absolutely positively something that's doable, that's being done.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've had good days dating and bad days dating, but I've dated.
Great, fantastic.
Always, and always in that world like everyone else.
Yeah, that's what's so harmful about his comments, because they're gross generalizations. And you said it best, Tarik, when you said he's not a doctor, he's not a scientist. Well, luckily for us on this show, we do have one of the nation's leading autism scientists joining us, Dr. Dan Geschwind. He is the Gordon and Virginia McDonald Distinguished Professor of Human Genetics, Neurology, and Psychiatry at UCLA. And that's all a fancy way of just saying he is a big brain scientist. He's super smart. He leads his own lab at UCLA. He and I have worked together on genetics related to autism, his genetic study for almost the last probably 10 years or going on 10 years. And I'm just super excited to have him joining us. Well, let me just start, Dr. Geschwind, once saying welcome. But I also want to read something that RFK Jr. said. And these are his words. He said, by September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures. He also said, this is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure. I want to break that down because there's a lot in here, starting with the word epidemic. Help us understand why scientists like you pushed back on the characterization of autism as an epidemic.
Sure. First, thanks for having me on. And it's really a pleasure to be with Vana and Dwayne and Tarik and hear their stories. So thank you, guys. When I started working in autism, it was through actually a friend who had an autistic son. And at that point, let's just say 25 or so years ago, autism was like 1 in 2,000, roughly, even as low as 1 in 5,000. And so now we're talking about, let's just say 1 in 50, just to keep the math easy. And so the question is, what's changed, right? That's the prevalence of autism. And of course, it's based on certain ways of studying and looking through records and stuff. What's really changed is the definition of autism. It's a much broader spectrum than it was. And the ability to recognize it and diagnose it. there's no longer nearly as much stigma associated with it. People used to say, I have a number of friends who said, I wish at the time, let's say 30 years ago, when my child was diagnosed, that they had had cancer. At least people would have felt sorry for me or understood what I was going through. 30 or 40 years ago, nobody really, that wasn't in the public eye. And so now it's in the public eye, there's more understanding. So there are a lot of different things that have gone into this, but it's not really an epidemic. It's just a common, we can call it a disorder, a difference, because it's such a wide spectrum from folk like Tarik and Dwayne, who many people wouldn't even, in talking with them, wouldn't even pick up on it, on anything, that would set them aside from being neurotypical, to people who are about, almost a third are have intellectual disability, right? But intellectual disability is not necessary at all. In fact, the majority of people with autism don't have intellectual disability, but so there's a wide spectrum, and it's widened over time, and the ability to detect it has changed massively. So, there have been several studies looking back using our current diagnostic rubric, but looking at records that are, let's say, 25, 30 years old, mostly been done in Europe. And when they do that, instead of having 1 in 5,000, they have numbers of 1 in 100, right? So that, it's clear that the diagnostic changes and our ability to pick it up is really the major driving force. Another thing is that if you look in the US and you look at these prevalence numbers, they differ widely, almost tenfold sometimes by state. And so a lot of the diagnosis has to do with what's available. And in some states, there's just much more available for diagnosis. And there are many more services. And so the more services that are offered, the more likely folks are to be diagnosed. And so, here's another thing, right? Like in 20 years, what kind of environmental thing has changed massively, right? The prevalence has changed. There's so many things that you can look at to say that it's unlikely to be an epidemic per se. It's just a common part of the human condition.
So, okay, you've disabused us of any notion that this is an epidemic. The other thing that RFK said is by September, right, just a couple of months from now, he says we're going to know what has caused, again, the autism epidemic. What's going to happen between now and September? Is there any validity to that statement?
Well, let me say one thing. Even though it's not an epidemic in terms of, like an infectious disease, it's still pretty common. So there's a lot of research and other stuff that needs to be done. And, starting about 30 years ago or so, 25 years ago, the Combating Autism Act was passed by Congress, and that led to an increase in funding for autism research, which has led to enormous advances in what we know about autism. There's just no question, but it's taken several decades. Research, unfortunately, does not go as fast as we would like. And we can't just wish things into being the way we would like them to be. They are the way they are. And research is painstaking, has to be done carefully, and takes time. Now, it's great. I mean, if they can put like enormous resources into something and make huge progress in 4 or 5 months, that would be great. I'm skeptical of it, as one should be, because skepticism is part of science, right? We view every result with skepticism. So a critical piece of this is whatever they do, all of the data, all of the analysis on which they're going to base whatever they're going to say has to be transparent and made public and viewable, just like everything in the scientific literature. Transparency and the ability to say, okay, if I did this analysis, would I find the same results, right? That's a key cornerstone of the scientific method and the transparency that's been talked about. So
well,
I think that's going to...
I think we can pretty much surmise that that's not going to happen, because at the same time, there this big pronouncement about telling us what causes autism by September. There have been massive cuts to key departments that are involved in research around autism. So you can't both cut research at the Department of Education, at the Institute of Public Health, the CDC, and at the same time say you're going to find, make some big revelation about the cause. So there are two things.
That's a really good point. I mean, that is a really good point, that, the cuts to funding across the board, not just autism, but many brain disorders from Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, et cetera, look so far to be pretty profound and pretty scary. And not only would they, they'll have a chilling effect on research here that could last a generation. And we could lose enormous competitive advantage that we have in research. People come from all over the world to do research here because it's the Mecca, because we're so scientifically advanced and we support it so well. And all of that, is changing rapidly. So we're giving up, even if you're not even, if your major interest is in economic prosperity and being, number one and all of that. We are number one in scientific research and biomedical research, and it leads to enormous economic prosperity. There's a thought that it's almost $3 to 1 in terms of the economic benefit of supporting basic research. And so it's just a no-brainer. And so I'm of two minds, right? One is all these cuts are draconian and potentially devastating. And yet, at the other hand, there's been a statement that they're going to do a big research project on this. So I can't possibly know what that is. I'm not involved in it. And it would be very surprising to me if it can be done that quickly. I mean, not using standard methods or anything. And so
yeah, I think we can
would be
all...
that they make it, that they make it transparent and public so we can look at it and see if there's anything actually there. But
well,
you said,
I know you're more careful about your statement, but I think we can safely say it's not going to be possible between now, mid-April and September, to do that which has not been done by scientific institutions.
Well, let me say, if I said that, if I got the top 10 autism researchers in the world together and we all sat in a room and we made that pronouncement, our colleagues would not take us seriously and think that something had happened to us, that we were living in an alternate reality. So absolutely. I agree with you there.
Yeah. Let's move on to another part of the statement. He says that this is a preventable disease. We know it's an environmental exposure. Is that reducing the spectrum in a way that is harmful and is too simplistic of a statement? Again, that this is I guess it's false. Is it false that it's preventable? Yeah. Because if it was preventable, we're preventing it.
Well, I hope a lot of disorders are preventable in the future, right? Like, so here's the deal with autism. There's the 3 decades of research that have been intense have really proven that autism, as well as many other mental health conditions, have very strong genetic susceptibility. Autism being among the most heritable of neuropsychiatric conditions, almost 80%. And that's been borne out by many different types of studies, including some very large-scale studies in Scandinavia and Northern Europe that are really well controlled. So it's pretty clear. And so they're just not, and those same studies, these epidemiologic studies, have not shown a lot of room for environmental factors. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some, right? Like, we know of some, especially rare things like fetal valproate exposure or fetal rubella. I mean, and that is a little bit ironic as well, rubella being a form of measles virus, right? And that is one of the known causes when mothers have it and give it to their fetuses. In other words, everything we know about autism is that one is born with the susceptibility or the predisposition. And it's not something that happens long after birth when, whether it's environmental or genetic. And so, there just isn't much room for striking, environmental calls where we can just remove some kind of toxicant from the environment, and that's going to, and that's going to remove things, and that's going to stop autism.
Removing some toxin from the environment is not going to make autism go away. That's essentially what you're saying.
Right. There's no evidence that there are toxins that are causing it in any broad way. There's just no evidence. And to be very clear, the question about vaccines is a reasonable question to ask because the symptoms first emerge around the time when vaccines are being given to young babies, infants. So it's a reasonable question to ask. It's been asked more than 24 times, asked and answered, and it's just not there. It's one of the most thoroughly studied things in autism, and the negative results are crystal clear there. And so one thing, parents aren't exposing their kids to something that's preventable. It's not their fault. And by saying that there's something
that is so important, because when you say something is preventable and then you talk about obesity and you talk about parents, it harkens back to the 50s when we know, the myths about refrigerator moms and the way that parents, particularly mothers, not just both parents, but mothers in particular, were blamed for their kids' autism. And we saw what that led to. We saw, it led to kids being locked away in their homes, being, shipped away to these private camps. And we learned so much, and we worked so hard to fight against those stigmas and to cause people to come forward to get diagnoses, to get interventions, and to get help. So when you hear a statement like that something is preventable, it just breaks my heart, because I know a lot of parents are sitting at home saying, oh my God, what did I do? If this was preventable, then maybe I did something wrong when I was pregnant, or maybe I went to a state and I was exposed to some kind of toxin in the air, and that is so harmful. Vana, I want to bring you back in as a mother. When you hear those kinds of comments, and you've been a parent advocate, you've helped other parents, how harmful is that?
Extremely. Because as you mentioned, I personally and other mothers I know, we did wonder if we did something wrong. I remember calling my aunt, who's, the one who's the Bible thumper and a nurse, could I have? And she said, of course not. Anything that we did, every other mother did. But I want to speak particularly to how I believe the HHS secretary plans to have these results. Now, he's talking about a registry, and he's talking about having data in real time. We have to remember, these are novices taking the positions of experts in this administration across the board. So we have people coming up with ideas without a background. And when you are a parent and when you think it could be your fault, you do the deep dive, and everybody brings you data. And it was so refreshing hearing Dr. Geschwind go over all these studies that we've read about, because aunt moms are on Google for hours upon hours upon hours. We become experts because we read all of these studies. We know what we didn't do. So for him to put the onus back on something that we could have done is painful. He needs to really just take a trip to a autism institution. Come hang out with the Special Needs Network. Walk with Areva Martin so he can understand, because he's clearly stepping out beyond his means, and we want to raise him up. I would like to help him. If he's having cuts, let's use that money to help educate non-speakers. I wrote a nonverbal communication mandate several years ago. I've lobbied legislators. I wrote it and researched and worked on it for years. And we had a block at the Department of Education because the methods are not scientifically proven. If you give somebody the ability to have an age-appropriate education by pointing to letters, do you need scientific research? Do you? I don't know, but I'd like him to use this money he's taking away and put it back into educating non-speakers and partial speakers.
No, really good points. Let's be clear here. RFK Jr. has a history of, perpetuating, disseminating junk science, science that's not science, and perpetuating myths about autism and its ties to vaccines that, as Dr. Geschwind has said, that scientific research and reports and data have disproven, but yet he peddles in conspiracy theories. He's dangerous. He was dangerous before he was our Health and Human Services Secretary. He's now even more dangerous because of the bully pulpit that he has and his ability to command the attention of mainstream media, of corporate media, and to continue to peddle in these conspiracy theories. Dr. Geschwind, two quick things I want you to help us understand. Agnotology, big word, but I think it's so important in this moment that we all understand it. And then eugenics, because again, when I heard this as a civil rights lawyer, I thought about eugenics. I was very involved in looking at, studying what happened to people who had intellectual disabilities, people who had disabilities in our country at a time when we thought if you didn't meet the white European standard of being a perfect person, you were not worthy of even being alive. And the statements that RFK Jr. made go to the humanity of people with autism, go to the humanity of people who have disabilities, suggesting that unless you can do this laundry list of things, somehow your life is not as valuable. You're not deserving to live. Your humanity is not important. And that's very dangerous in our country.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I think what Dwayne said about the stuff that's missing, one of the main things that was missing from that is the notion of love and attachments with people. And, the fact it used to be, 30, 40 years ago, there was some thoughts that, autistic people couldn't form, mother-child bonds and those kind of things. And that's patently untrue. And in fact, and autistic people have enormously, close need for, for that, it's just it's not true. And so, one thing that was missing is the ability, I think most of us would probably agree that rather than accumulating stuff for what you do, it's who you are and kind of the love that you give to people and the love and the relationships that you have and your family. And, most of us value that more than anything. And autistic people are, just like everybody else in that way. It's just us, they're and there's a huge amount of variety as well, right? Like everybody's different. Every person is different. Same thing here. You've met one person with autism, you met one. It's one person. And so just the notion of what was missing from those statements and, the lack of understanding of the joy that our autistic friends and family members and others, share with us and bring with us. That was entirely missing from that. And that's a kind of tragedy. So, you were asking about the kind of perpetuation of ignorance and stuff. I don't understand it. You guys probably are much more, grounded in the political, what's going on. Like, why would anybody who really cared about helping autistic people and their families perpetrate things that are known not to be true, take funding away, and put it into things that are unlikely to yield any benefit? For the life of me, I can't answer that. It just makes no sense to me.
Quickly though, Dr. Geschwind, help us understand agnotology, because I think it's a concept that we all need to be very aware of in this moment.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in it. I mean, I'm seeing it all around. It's the use of kind of perpetuating a lack of knowledge and ignorance.
Ignorance, non-scientific information. I just want everybody to be aware of it, so that when you hear these comments, you can think. Agnotology, word of the day, that this is the dissemination of just ill-informed, non-scientific,
Yeah.
non-data driven information, and it is not to be believed, it's not to be used, and it's not to be internalized. And then eugenics, real quickly,
Yeah.
that
So-
period in our country, what was it like?
Well, I mean, I have no idea really, and it's not just our country, right? It's been throughout history. It's been used, most in last century in Germany, but it's been used all over the place, really. There've been a number of different, genocides or attempted genocides. But, one thing that sometimes isn't appreciated is that, those of us who study genetics aren't trying to, it has nothing to do with eugenics. We're not trying to, purify the population, identify people with mutations and, kind of weed them out. Nothing like that. What we want to do is you understand the mutation so you can understand the cause, you can understand the biology, and then you can help people to the extent they want to be helped or need to be helped. Many people, as we've seen on the spectrum, don't even feel they need to be accommodated. They can, they learn how to function. Others need accommodations, just like people with disabilities, and others have a medical genetic condition that needs, medical and psychiatric care, for lifetime. And so we have to appreciate that spectrum. And a lot of times, those of us in the biomedical field are working with those who are on the more severe part of the spectrum, and we're trying to understand what that is so that we can help the comorbidities that come along with that, like intellectual disability, like seizures, like other medical conditions.
Yeah, there's so much in the science of autism that this Health and Human Services Secretary is not talking about. The whole issue of comorbidity, the whole issue of mental health. There are real issues that some people with autism have. I wish we could have a more intelligent, science and data-driven conversation rather than this conversation that does veer towards, eugenics and you said it best, purifying the population. So I want folks to look up that word, study that part of U.S. history, of world history, because I think it's important when we start talking about registries and people with autism having to sign up to a registry and to, provide their personal information to the government. All very, very dangerous. And then look up this word agnotology. I think, again, you're going to hear a lot of just junk science coming out of this White House. And we have to be armed with knowledge, armed with facts and evidence and data and good information so we all can continue to push back. We know that Tarik and Dwayne and so many other people, Vana's two sons, my son Marty, living with autism, are incredible human beings. And when we diagnose early, when we provide early intervention, we provide a lot of love and support, they can become professional baseball players and professional basketball players and spoken word poets and artists, and they can just do whatever it is that they desire to do.
Brothers and sisters and children.
Brothers and sisters and loving human beings, yes. Judge them in terms of the content of their character, not how many taxes they pay when we're not checking that way for these huge corporations that aren't paying their taxes. Whole nother story. But I want to thank you so much, Tarik. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Vana. Thank you, Dr. Geschwind. All your voices are so important in this moment. Your expertise, your advocacy, and your commitment to educating, raising awareness, and helping people be more accepting of people on the spectrum. We are all in this together, and it definitely takes a village. And again, one thing that's very clear from today's conversation is autism is not a defect. It's a different way of being human, one that enriches our families, our culture, and our future. We have to embrace that. We have to internalize that. And we have to reject the fear, and we have to reject those that would disseminate disinformation and would stoke or try to stoke fear in our community. Let's build a world where every mind and every voice and every person is valued. I'm Areva Martin, and this has been the Special Report. Stay informed, stay inspired, and stay in the fight for truth. If you want more information about the Special Report, follow me across all social platforms at Areva Martin. Subscribe to my YouTube page and share the Special Report.
Calling all BIPOC college students, recent college graduates, and clinicians. Here's my story about CORE, a unique workforce development program that is changing lives. My brother is the most caring person you'll ever meet. With his autism diagnosis, my family had to fight to make sure that the resources he deserved were available. That's why my goal has always been to help children with developmental disabilities and give them chances my brother may have missed. So when I heard about the CORE Fellowship, I knew immediately it was for me. The fellowship opens doors for myself and others like me. They offer training, a stipend while you're learning, job placement, and they'll pay up to $10,000 of my student loan debt. The CORE Fellowship is going to allow me to achieve my life's purpose. They care about me, so I can care about others, like my brother. Visit the website to learn more about the CORE Fellowship. Discover your core passion, your power, and your purpose. Apply today.